Welcome to the Gentleman's Guide to, well, Hunter for the very first time. I don't think we've ever talked about Hunter the Reckoning on this channel, and there's a reason for that. I've never been a fan of Hunter the Reckoning. We're off to a good start here with this video. Now, one of the backers of both The World Below and Curseborn asked for a video on mixing Hunter the Reckoning and Hunter the Vigil together. And it's a subject I've pondered over. I made a video way back when about incorporating compacts and conspiracies into Hunter the Reckoning and subsequently lost it. And to be honest, I'm glad that I lost that video. It was on not this phone, but on a different one. Yes, I record most of my videos on phone now. There's no reason for you to not do the same. Everyone's got a wonderful camera in their pockets these days, far better than any webcam. But anyway, I made that video, I lost it before I could upload it, and honestly I'm glad. I think I got very much into the mechanical side of things and how to amalgamate Vigil and Reckoning, and I think it was a bit of a boring topic. And since that time I have thought a lot about mixing the two together. At Onyx Path, we've released Hunter the Vigil 2nd edition. It has done very, very well. I will link it below for anyone who has not picked up Hunter the Vigil 2nd edition, because it is a very good book. And I believe Renegade have released Hunter the Reckoning, and I think they have called it Hunter the Reckoning 5th edition, even though, of course, there hasn't been a 2nd edition of Hunter the Reckoning, but it's technically a bolt-on to Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition, and is more akin to Hunters Hunted than Hunter the Reckoning, just to be confusing. And we have, of course, done a Hunters Hunted for V20, so Hunters Hunted 20th Anniversary Edition. So it's all great. It's all great and not confusing at all. So lots of things have happened since I recorded that original video, and my thoughts have changed a fair amount. One thing that hasn't changed is I'm not a fan of Hunter the Reckoning, and and it isn't because the game is badly written. By no means is it badly written. Nothing like that. I remember enjoying reading Hunter the Reckoning when I first got it in, I guess, 2002, 2003. I just never felt drawn to run it, and my reason being, I always enjoyed the idea of humans as being, well, not necessarily victims, but plucky survivors. The idea that hunters in the world of darkness are more interesting if the odds are stacked against them, rather than if they are given supernatural powers with which to fight the forces of the supernatural, of hell, and the like. So I was always drawn more to the Hunters Hunted style, the Society of St. Leopold as it became, or the Arcanum, and so forth, Task Force X. I think that... hang on, that's the Suicide Squad. But my point being, Reckoning never spoke to me. It was never a game I was terribly interested in running or playing, despite enjoying the reading of it. And then Hunter the Vigil came along, and that very much spoke to me. I loved Hunter the Vigil 1st edition. Any of you mainstays here, people who have been subscribed to this channel for quite some time, will be aware that I ran a series of Hunter the Vigil chronicles across the UK Games Expo 3 years in a row, and managed to draw the same group back 3 times in a row. This was before social media, so we weren't communicating with each other. It was just people wanted to play that game, and they kept signing up for it year after year after year, and that was a great watershed game for me, even though these days I can look back at some of the content and say, well, I put that in purely for shock value. It's rather juvenile and crude now. But I loved Hunter the Vigil. I loved the compacts and conspiracies. I loved the whole setup of it. I loved the idea of teamwork as a mechanic, the idea of reinforcing mechanically that you are better when you're working together than when you're working solo. It was something that had only really been explored elsewhere in the werewolf games, both Forsaken and Apocalypse, and even then it wasn't as at the forefront as tactics in Hunter the Vigil. Now, Hunter the Vigil 2nd edition comes out, and I'm a big fan of that. I only did a tiny amount of work on it. Most of my Hunter the Vigil work has been in the Contagion Chronicle and Dark Eras books, but I really enjoyed it. I thought that the refinement of the system from first edition to second edition really did the game a lot of favours. There's, to be honest, a lot you can still use from first edition, but incorporating the slashers, World of Darkness slasher, into Hunt of the Vigil second edition to make it the Slasher Chronicle was a really good move, I thought, and really made the game feel more complete to me. I felt like things like making Ashwood Abbey more, I guess, outwardly antagonistic made sense, even though I always knew a lot of people who enjoyed playing Ashwood Abbey. Let's be clear, they were the edgelords in Hunt of the Vigil. They were the trophy hunters. They were the hired killers with very few moral scruples in Hunt of the Vigil. So making them more outwardly antagonistic made sense, but they're still playable. All that said, I have not read the latest Hunt of the Reckoning. I am given to understand it has its fans and it has its detractors, as all games do. And this video isn't here to autopsy the Hunt of the Reckoning latest edition. Rather, it's how to merge the two. Now, part of this, for me, comes down to positioning, which is always important. The Hunt of the Reckoning game is, as I say, it isn't in keeping with the tone I enjoy in a horror game. I don't like it when humans have as many gifts, maybe more than the supernatural creatures they're hunting, because all the threat disappears from it. And that isn't always the case in Hunt of the Reckoning, don't get me wrong. There are still plenty of threats you can go up against that will way outmatch you, but it's a tonal thing too. And so I go back to what my pitch was for Hunt of the Reckoning 5th edition, which I know isn't going to be picked up now, which was, I guess, a little Highlander-like. It wasn't intended to be. But my idea was that Gehenna happens, or the apocalypse happens, that the Reckoning, the imbued in Hunt of the Reckoning, did indeed get their gifts from some supernatural power. Some would ascribe it to God, others would ascribe it to probably Satan and other sources, and it wasn't always Abrahamic in nature. There were plenty of people who attributed their imbuements, if that's a word, to inner peace or balance or whatever their source, their love of family, their love of community. They had their gifts, and then the end of the world happened, which for them wasn't the total annihilation of vampires. It wasn't a total apocalypse of werewolves. It was that their gifts disappeared. And certain imbued spoke to each other. They used HunterNet, and they spoke to each other, and they said to each other, "This must mean our task is done. This must mean that we have been successful." And so they returned to their lives happy. They returned knowing that they had no further mission to pursue. And others felt abandoned. Others felt like they had been glorious guardians, wardens, paladins of God, and whatever their power source happened to be, and all of a sudden the power had been switched off and they no longer had access to all of those mighty, glorious gifts. Why had they been abandoned? What had they done to fail God above? And so they came to a certain penitence, self-loathing, not just self-loathing, but loathing the person who had given them such power and then stripped it away without so much as a herald to tell them why. Because a lot of these hunters were aware, some of them were on the trail of vampires or demons or mages or whatever when their powers vanished. Some were even in conflict with them and luckily managed to crawl away intact. And so they're wondering, what happened and why? How dare you abandon us when we needed you, when we were serving you? And in this pitch, I had the idea that there is the idea, and this is the Highlander side of things, that you can still gain the powers of being imbued if you slay another hunter. So you can start absorbing their kernel, their little flame, their flickering flame of vigil inside them, and slowly build up your own power to become a sainted angel of God once more. Now, the general theme of that Hunt of the Reckoning pitch was, much as with my Get a Fenris video, the idea of veterans returning from a war and being given no support net. The idea of characters who have basically been told, this is the fight for existence. This is what you were made for. And then all of a sudden, nope, war's over, go home. No provision, no security, no comfort. You are, at one moment, the world's greatest champion, and then all of a sudden, nothing. You are no different than that civilian over there, that thief over there, no better than that monster who you're staring at right now. I love that idea of bitterness. I love the idea of abandonment. I love the idea of characters feeling like they'd been betrayed by maybe not their own government, but by their own god. And I really liked that to the point that I ran it, and it went well. I played around with the Hunt of the Reckoning rules from the original, or I guess revised edition. And then, when I started running it, I started incorporating the compacts and conspiracies from Hunt of the Vigil. Because Hunt of the Vigil, oddly, felt to me like something that in many cases, especially with the low-level compact, could act as a successor to Hunt of the Reckoning when played through that lens. So, for example, your hunters, just because they've lost their gifts, aren't necessarily going to aren't just going to put their weapons down. They are aware that the world is worse, is more dangerous, is more inflicted with the supernatural than anyone else knows. And just because they can no longer use powers against them doesn't mean they're going to stop fighting. So this is where your compacts like the Union, and where Ashwood Abbey, and where Null Mysterious, and the Thule group as well, all come into being. Some of them could have existed before, and that's how I positioned it. Some of these were always historical groups that supported monster hunting in the same way as the Society of Leopold did. And the Arcanum encouraged the research of the supernatural, but now they were having people who had been on the front lines, these forcibly retired hunters, joining their groups as well to actually lead the vanguard, because they can't stop fighting. Fighting is all they know. Their eyes have been opened and it's impossible to shut them again. So it was a way of incorporating those compacts into Hunt of the Reckoning, now that the imbuements were more remote, or they're still an aspect, because of course if you slay another hunter you can take them, because I wanted to keep that part in. I like it a lot, and I think people gelled with it. I think providing the, I guess, political and conspiratorial structure of Hunt of the Vigil worked a great deal to provide Hunt of the Reckoning with more legs with which to play, if that makes sense. Now, when you start getting into conspiracies, when you start looking at the supernatural aspect again, of course, I tied the Chiron group into being a branch of Pentex, because that is totally natural. I think having the Chiron group be a subsidiary of Pentex, maybe even a rival for the Magadon Pharmaceutical Corporation, the idea of medicinal and biological augmentations to your hunters. You no longer have your spiritual gifts. You are no longer imbued. So now we have to change you in other ways to make you strong. Speaks to me. The idea of the Lucifuge moving in, that great conspiracy of essentially Lucifer worshippers who believe they have been granted their gifts, because of course the Lucifuge have supernatural powers. I love the idea that there will be hunters who's so desperate for the gifts that God gave them, and now feeling like he has abandoned them, would start turning to the adversary to look for their gifts instead. They probably wouldn't go seeking them themselves, but when they would witness a apparent mortal using powers untold, they may ask, where have you got these from? I made a deal. I made a pact. I made a compact with this group over here. And they'd say, but you are dealing with the devil. He says, The devil doesn't care how I use these gifts. I can use these gifts to help my fellow humankind. In fact, I think the devil appreciates that in a way. So why don't you come and join the Lucifuge now? And there are certain compacts and conspiracies that really lend themselves to that cannibalistic side of Hunter the Reckoning, as I envision it, that idea of not only have you been abandoned, but you can also reclaim some of that power whenever another hunter who was imbued dies. Of course, it's a steadily diminishing resource, as one of the big aspects of the hunter game I run has that your characters, just as you know that the world is supernatural, just as you know now that werewolves and vampires and mummies and the rest exist, they know about you. If you've been making a kindred's unlife hell for the last 20 years because you've been doggedly disrupting all of their plans, that kindred is going to be rubbing their hands together when they realize, oh, that hunter who's been hounding me no longer has the abilities that he had before. He can't resist my mental intrusions anymore. Yes, now, well, the hunter becomes the hunted, to use an oft-used phrase. So you immediately put your characters in a state of, oh shit, we were the predators and now we are the prey. I think that is a really interesting way of turning Hunter to make it a more interesting game, to me anyway. And it's all subjective, obviously. Some people really love the power fantasy, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's plenty of good power fantasy games out there. I think it is one of the easiest pair of World of Darkness, Chronicles of Darkness games to merge together. Reckoning and Vigil. My entire metaplot idea of it, of the imbued suddenly lose their gifts and so forth, is just the way I thread the needle. But in terms of the compacts and conspiracies and actually making them form part of Hunter the Reckoning, I think that is a very simple thing to do, especially if you imply some of these compacts and conspiracies are new to the former imbued. Some of them have been around for as long as the Arcanum or longer. There are some that have stretched back thousands of years. If you're familiar with Hunter the Vigil, you know this, and others are definitely more new, like Task Force, Valkyrie, and Vasco, and so on. They're very 21st century in feel, but it makes sense to me that if you're just playing Vigil straight, you can slot them in nicely as Hunters Hunted alternatives. If you want to mix them with Reckoning, follow my advice, do what I did, and I think you'll have a lot of fun with it. So, is this the video where I say, this compact goes there, this conspiracy does this compact becomes controlled by Clan Tremere, and so on? No, because there are certain leaps you have to make yourself. I've already told you Chiron's part of Pentax now, and I think that's a fairly logical one. But you can do what you like with it, and I'd be very interested to hear how you would mix Reckoning and Vigil. So do let me know in the comments below how you would handle it. Thank you very much for watching.